Imagine watching your own brother's head roll across the palace floor, then your uncle's, then your cousin's. One by one, every single person who shares your blood becomes a corpse. And the person ordering these executions? The one man who should protect the family above all else, the king himself. In just 72 hours, an entire royal bloodline was wiped out. 38 family members, 38 men, women, even children as young as 12, all dead. Not from disease, not from war, but from calculated, methodical murder. And here's the truly insane part. The man who did this wasn't some barbarian warlord or crazed dictator. He was considered one of the most cultured, educated rulers of his time. Poets wrote verses in his honor. Philosophers sought his patronage. Foreign ambassadors called him enlightened. Yet behind closed doors, he orchestrated the most shocking family massacre in royal history. What you're about to hear sounds like something from Game of Thrones, except this actually happened. And when you learn why he did it, how he pulled it off, and what happened to him in the end, you'll understand why historians still debate whether he was a genius or a monster. This is King Murad IV of the Ottoman Empire. And boy did he take the phrase "heavy is the head that wears the crown" to a whole new level of darkness. Welcome to the insane true story of the king who killed his entire family to hold his throne. You see, Murad wasn't supposed to be king at all. Born in 1612 as the fourth son of Sultan Ahmed I, he was so far down the line of succession that nobody paid him much attention. While his older brothers received the finest education and military training, Murad spent his childhood essentially locked away in what the Ottomans called the Golden Cage, a luxurious prison where potential heirs were kept to prevent them from plotting against the Sultan. Imagine being 7 years old, living in unimaginable luxury, but knowing that at any moment, a silk cord could wrap around your neck if you became too much of a threat. It was an early lesson for Murad that in the Ottoman court, family meant nothing compared to power. The truth is, watching his brothers and cousins constantly plotting against each other while pretending to be loyal shaped something dark in young Murad's psychology. He would later reflect on this and say that the cage taught him the most important lesson of his life: trust no one, especially not your blood. But here's the crucial part that most people don't know. When Murad was just 11 years old, he witnessed something that would haunt him forever. His uncle, Sultan Osman II, was murdered by his own janissaries, the elite guard meant to protect him. But it wasn't just a simple assassination. They dragged Osman through the streets, tortured him for hours, then strangled him so violently that his eardrums burst. And who celebrated this brutal murder? Osman's own cousins and brothers, including members of Murad's immediate family. Young Murad watched from a palace window as his relatives toasted with wine while his uncle's mutilated body was displayed in the courtyard below. He must have thought to himself, "This is what happens when a sultan shows weakness. This is what family really means in the Ottoman Empire." Now, what's really interesting though is that despite this traumatic childhood, Murad initially showed signs of being different. Unlike his paranoid predecessors, he loved poetry, spent hours studying philosophy, and even composed his own music. Foreign ambassadors who met him as a teenager described him as gentle, thoughtful, with eyes that held deep sadness. One Venetian diplomat wrote, "The young prince seems more suited for a monastery than a throne." Little did anyone know that this gentle, artistic soul would transform into one of the most ruthless rulers in Ottoman history. But how does a sensitive, poetry-loving teenager end up ordering the systematic execution of 38 family members? The answer involves a perfect storm of betrayal, paranoia, and a realization that would change everything. In September 1623, everything changed. Murad's older brother, Sultan Mustafa I, had gone completely insane, and this isn't an exaggeration. Historical records show he would run naked through the palace, throwing gold coins at fish in the palace pools, believing they were his advisors. The empire was in chaos. Provincial governors were declaring independence. The Janissaries were rioting for higher pay. And most dangerously, Murad's other brothers and cousins were all maneuvering to take the throne. At just 11 years old, Murad was suddenly thrust onto the throne because the court needed someone they thought they could control. They chose wrong. But Murad saw an opportunity here that everyone else missed. You see, while everyone thought they were putting a child puppet on the throne, Murad had spent years in that golden cage, studying every power player in the court. He knew their weaknesses, their desires, their secret alliances. Using these new connections, he began playing a game so sophisticated that seasoned politicians didn't realize they were being manipulated by a child. He would tell his uncle one thing, his mother another, his grand vizier something completely different, then watch as they all acted on false information, destroying each other while thinking they were winning. Here's where it gets crazy though. By the time Murad turned 16, he had already survived 4 assassination attempts, all orchestrated by his own family members. His brother Bayezid tried to poison his wine. His cousin Suleiman attempted to bribe the palace guards to strangle him in his sleep. Even his own mother, Kusum Sultan, was rumored to be considering replacing him with his more malleable younger brother, Ibrahim. But here's the crucial part. Murad didn't retaliate immediately. Instead, he kept a mental list of every betrayal, every plot, every whispered conspiracy. He would smile at family dinners, embrace his brothers, play the role of the naive young sultan. But behind those sad eyes that diplomats had noticed, a terrible plan was forming. The problem was, Murad had learned that in the Ottoman system, as long as any male relative lived, they were a potential threat. It didn't matter if they were loyal today, tomorrow. Ambitious viziers or foreign powers could use them as pawns to challenge his rule. In many ways, it was such an incredibly simple realization, but it was the meticulous planning that would make what happened next possible. He spent 3 entire years, carefully documenting every possible claim his relatives had to the throne, studying Ottoman law for precedents, and most brilliantly, identifying which religious leaders he could convince to support what he was about to do. Then, in 1632, when Murad was 20 years old, he made his move. But what people didn't realize was that he had been setting this up for months. First, he invited all his male relatives to a grand feast, celebrating a military victory against the Persians. 38 princes, from his elderly uncles to his teenage cousins, all gathered in the palace's great hall. The wine flowed freely, which was unusual since Murad had recently banned alcohol for everyone else in the empire. But tonight was special, he told them. Tonight they would celebrate as a family. Now you might be thinking this sounds like a scene from a movie, and you'd be right to be suspicious. But here's what the historical records actually show. Murad stood up to give a toast, praising each family member by name, recounting their ancestors' great deeds, speaking about the importance of Ottoman unity. His relatives relaxed, many getting drunk for the first time in months. And then, at exactly midnight, Murad gave a single nod. The doors burst open. Not guards, not soldiers, but the Bostansha, the Sultan's personal executioners, men who had been specifically trained in the art of silent strangulation. What happened next took less than an hour. The executioners moved through the room with practiced efficiency. The silk cords, the traditional Ottoman method of royal execution, wrapped around throat after throat. Some tried to fight. Prince Mahmud, Murad's own cousin, managed to kill 2 executioners before 5 more brought him down. Others tried to plead, reminding Murad of their childhood together, of bonds of blood and family. But here's what's absolutely insane. Murad didn't leave the room. He sat on his throne, drinking wine, watching each execution personally. When his youngest brother, 14-year-old Qasim, was brought before him, the boy didn't beg for his life. Instead, he looked Murad in the eyes and said, "You're right to do this. I would have done the same." Murad reportedly wept as the cord tightened around Qasim's neck, but he didn't stop it. By dawn, the Ottoman dynasty had been reduced to just 2 people, Murad himself and his brother Ibrahim, whom he spared only because Ibrahim was mentally disabled and considered no threat. The bodies were wrapped in silk shrouds and buried in unmarked graves within the palace grounds. No prayers were said. No mourning was allowed. In today's money, Murad had just eliminated potential rivals who collectively controlled wealth equivalent to $2.8 billion. But Murad now had absolute power, and this is very different to what normal people can comprehend. Foreign ambassadors reported that after the massacre, Murad seemed transformed. The sad, thoughtful young man was gone. In his place stood someone who would execute anyone who even looked at him wrong. But the family massacre didn't stop there. The problem was Murad had now tasted the ultimate power that came from eliminating all opposition, and like an addiction, he needed more. Within 6 months of the massacre, he expanded his definition of threat to include not just blood relatives, but anyone connected to them. The wives of his executed brothers, 17 women in total, were strangled with silk scarves. Their children, some as young as 5 years old, were drowned in the Bosphorus. Even servants who had shown loyalty to his dead relatives disappeared in the night. Little did Murad know, however, that his brutal actions were creating the very thing he feared most: organized opposition. You see, by killing all potential heirs except Ibrahim, he had actually made himself more vulnerable. The Janissaries, the religious leaders, the provincial governors, Tuel, they all realized that if Murad died without an heir, the empire would fall into chaos. And Murad, perhaps driven mad by paranoia or guilt, had banned all women from his presence, making it impossible for him to produce an heir. Back in Istanbul, people were starting to ask questions. How could a sultan, who claimed to rule by divine right, murder his own blood? Wasn't kinslaying one of the greatest sins in Islam? The religious establishment, which had initially supported Murad's consolidation of power, began to distance themselves. Secret meetings were held in mosques. Fatwas were quietly circulated, declaring Murad's rule illegitimate. But here's where Murad's genius or madness truly showed itself. He had spies everywhere, not just in the government or military, but in every coffee house, every market, every mosque. He created what historians call the first modern surveillance state. Anyone who whispered criticism of the Sultan would find themselves arrested within hours. And the punishment wasn't just death. It was public, creative, horrific death designed to traumatize anyone who watched. Then in February 1640, something happened that would seal Murad's fate. During a military campaign against Baghdad, he fell ill with what physicians described as cirrhosis of the liver. Ironic, considering he had banned alcohol for everyone except himself and had been drinking heavily since the night of the massacre. For Murad, as news of his illness started to come out, the paranoia reached new heights. Convinced that his physicians were trying to poison him, he had 3 of them executed. Believing his remaining advisors were already planning for his succession, he ordered surveillance on everyone in the palace, including his own mother. But the illness progressed rapidly. Within weeks, the mighty sultan who had terrorized an empire couldn't even stand without assistance. And this is where the story takes its final, ironic turn. On his deathbed, Murad called for his brother Ibrahim, the only family member he had spared, because he was too simple to be a threat. Historical accounts say that Murad looked at Ibrahim and whispered, "I should have killed you too." Then he gave one last order to his executioners: strangle Ibrahim immediately after his death. But here's the crucial part. The executioners refused. For the first time in his reign, someone defied the Sultan's direct order. They knew that Ibrahim was the last of the Ottoman line. Kill him, and the empire would collapse into civil war. Murad died on the 8th of February, 1640, at just 27 years old. His last words were reportedly, "The dynasty dies with me." But he was wrong. Ibrahim, the brother he had dismissed as an idiot, would become sultan and father many children, ensuring the Ottoman line continued. As for Murad, he left behind a complex legacy. Yes, he had murdered 38 family members in cold blood, but he had also reformed the military, conquered Baghdad, and brought stability to an empire on the brink of collapse. Ultimately, though, the people who suffered most were not just the 38 princes who died that night, but the entire Ottoman Empire. What is clear is this massacre fundamentally changed how power worked in one of the world's greatest empires. Before Murad, the Ottoman succession was brutal but had some limits. After him, paranoia became institutionalized. Future sultans, learning from Murad's example, would routinely execute their brothers upon taking the throne. The practice became so common, it got its own name, fratricide law. Reports suggest that towards the end, Murad had gone from a sensitive, artistic youth to a complete paranoid psychopath who trusted no one, loved no one, and found peace only in absolute control. Modern psychologists who have studied his case suggest he suffered from severe PTSD from his traumatic childhood, combined with what we'd now recognize as antisocial personality disorder. But does trauma excuse mass murder? Does the brutal logic of Ottoman politics justify killing children? What's really interesting is how Murad's story parallels modern dictators who purge their inner circles. Stalin's execution of his old Bolshevik comrades, Saddam Hussein's murder of Ba'ath Party members, Kim Jong-un's assassination of his own uncle and half-brother. The pattern is always the same: traumatic rise to power, initial restraint, then escalating paranoia leading to family massacre. It shows that when absolute power combines with absolute fear, even the bonds of blood mean nothing. The truth is, Murad's story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about power, survival, and morality. In a system where showing mercy means death, is brutality actually rational? When your own mother is plotting against you, can you really trust anyone? These aren't just historical questions. They're relevant every time we see a leader prioritize power over humanity, every time fear trumps family, every time someone decides that their survival matters more than everything else. Now, whilst the story of King Murad IV is pretty shocking, I still wouldn't call him the most paranoid ruler in history. For that, you're going to want to check out the absolutely insane story of Emperor Nero, a man who didn't just kill his family, but burned down his entire capital city just to build himself a bigger palace, then blamed it on the Christians and fed them to lions for entertainment. The level of madness, the sheer scale of destruction, and the creative brutality make Murad look almost reasonable by comparison. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed learning about one of history's most shocking family betrayals, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.